Okay, now we move into a consideration of how Iowa was settled. This is particularly settled by European Americans, not the Native Americans. In some ways, this map has a very similar pattern to the elevation map in the previous lecture. The very first frontier of 1830 is way down in the southeast corner where Keokuk is. This was the lowest elevation in the state and the area closest to the state of Missouri, which had been established in 1820, so 10 years earlier. Its location at the confluence of the Des Moines and Mississippi rivers lent itself to early settlement, as Keokuk then became a jumping off point for the rest of Iowa to the north along the Mississippi and into the interior along the Des Moines River. The second frontier is inland about 50 miles from the Mississippi, extending north to Dubuque County, across from the border of Illinois and what became Wisconsin. It includes the far southeastern part of the state, but before Iowa became a state, which was not until 1846, so Iowa was still a territory. The territorial capital was at Burlington on the Mississippi, where settlement began in 1833, and then the capital moved to Iowa City, a town that was established in 1839 at the very edge of this 1840 border. The third frontier of 1850 reached farther west and north, but not yet really to the middle of the state, except for the Des Moines area. Des Moines was really an outpost. It was fairly central. It was well watered, with both the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers meeting there. In fact, it was too well watered, as a huge flood in 1851, a flood that was actually greater than the flood we had in 2008, wiped out everything in low-lying areas. Essentially, the city started over in 1851 and then became the capital of the state in 1857. But we get ahead of our story. Before 1850, settlement had reached north into that little Switzerland area, that high hilly area in the northeast. Settlement then expanded a great deal by 1860, all the way to the southwestern part of the state along the Missouri River and north to the eastern half of the state along the Minnesota border. The northwestern part of the state still was not settled. The map shows a couple of nice pictures, one indicating a log cabin frontier between 1850 and 1860, and the other the sod house frontier between 1860 and 1870. This distinction is important as wood was available in the river valleys of the eastern part of the state, but in the northwest, frontier homes were made from sod as trees were few and far between. And I mentioned this when I talked about the Des Moines lobe, that was very flat and just very few trees in that part of the state. If you've ever been up there, the Little Sioux Valley has a lot of trees, but other than that, it's pretty flat. Finally, settlement in the state expanded to the northwest by 1870, except for the very northwest corner, the highest and harshest part of the state in terms of weather. So you can see the state was settled gradually over 50 years. The expansion became much more rapid during 1860s with the development of railroad lines across the state. And we'll see more about the impact of the railroads in the upcoming slides. Now this shows some of that. This is a map of Iowa in 1870. And it shows the density of settlement just by the cluster of names. And if you look closely, you can see the names of the counties, Johnson, Scott, Clinton, Jones, Lynn, and so forth. And you can see that Cedar Rapids is got a number of rail lines coming into it from the east, from Clinton area, as well as from Dubuque, and then I would say going out up to Waterloo and going over toward Ames area, as well as south down to Iowa City. So there's several hubs around the state. And Iowa's, railroads are a very important factor in Iowa, in the settlement of Iowa. It allowed people to get into the state, allowed goods to get out of the state, and it also became a major construction activity. A lot of people came to the state in order to build the railroads, and the railroad companies built towns at regular intervals across the state so that trains would have a place to get on more coal or water, and also to then drop off mail or to pick up goods as they went across the state. I think this map is kind of interesting in another way that I'm not sure that it was intentional, but it shows Illinois as a almost empty state. There's just, a few major rail lines and none of this other congestion of small towns. And of course, there were small towns throughout Illinois. Also, Minnesota, a little bit of it shows almost nothing up there. Nebraska, very little. But Missouri, here's the border of Iowa and Missouri, but Missouri is just as densely packed as Iowa. It shows a lot of small towns and streams. And I think perhaps it is because these rivers in Iowa extended into Missouri and down to the Missouri River. So a lot of rivers in the southern part of the state are really part of the Missouri territory also. So you could say there's a riverine logic to this map, as well as a settlement logic to the map. It's kind of an interesting one for that reason.